Strap in because I'm about to criticize your favorite childhood game and drum up an online hate mob. I never played Final Fantasy as a kid. I figured as a game dev, I had to play it, and I'm glad I did. It helped me distill the essence of the 90s so I could put it into my current N64 game project. This game may not be objectively that big when you compare it to modern titles, but the moment when I first left Midgar, the starting area for the game, and saw the world map, I knew I was in for a huge journey and was filled with this big sense of adventure. I have mixed feelings on random encounters. On the one hand, it makes the game feel more dangerous, and I needed to plan ahead with enough supplies to progress. On the other hand, they interrupt exploration and can sometimes just be annoying. I was frequently deterred from exploring an area simply because I was getting tired of repeating the same fights. Despite the downsides though, the game really wouldn't be the same without it. Fighting your way from save point to save point creates a lot of tension when you begin running low on resources. If the developers messed with this dynamic, the game world would feel completely different. So yeah, they did the right thing here. Although, the overworld doesn't have the same tension, because you can save anywhere you want. This safety net made me feel more free to explore, which is good because I often got lost trying to figure out what I was supposed to do next. You see, this game was before quest logs, so if you skipped over some important information, the game wasn't going to remember it for you. The game follows a fairly linear path that doesn't have many options to go except forward. I frequently found myself unsure of where I was supposed to go next, only to stumble across it by accident. You just gotta talk to NPCs sometimes. There was one moment in the game where I literally had no clue where I was supposed to go next. Found some random NPC in a house somewhere, and he told me where I was supposed to go. As I wandered from town to town, I was impressed by the amount of personality each one had. Many towns gave interesting backstories for party members, although during this chaotic middle section of the game, I felt like the main story was put on hold while the team chased Sephiroth all around the world.
How am I gonna find him, Uncle? He is clearly a master of evasive maneuvering.
You have no idea where you're going, do you?
I wasn't convinced Sephiroth had any clue where he was going. The story could have benefited if many of these towns were just optional side quests. That way, the player could progress the main story whenever they wanted to, but if Square had done this, the gameplay pacing would have suffered. See, having a very linear story makes it so you can also have linear difficulty. If the developers let the player do things in any order, then they couldn't ensure that the player isn't over or underpowered for any part of the optional content. So there really isn't a perfect solution here. If they try to fix the story pacing, the gameplay pacing suffers, and vice versa. It seems like Square chose to prioritize gameplay over story here, which was probably the right choice. It's clear that they put a lot of time into balancing the gameplay pacing. I felt like the game was always challenging enough to be engaging, but never unfair. It was a good time from beginning to end. While the main gameplay loop was pretty repetitive, I never felt like it got old, likely because the game switches things up with enough variety, jumping between combat, getting bits of story, playing minigames, and solving puzzles. I was genuinely surprised when I found myself suddenly playing a snowboarding game in the middle of a JRPG. And what? Is this a real-time strategy game? Huh. It's kind of janky though. It's nowhere near as good as something like Warcraft. This motorcycle minigame kind of feels like playing Road Rash. And well, who could forget Chocobo racing? None of the minigames were fun enough that I would replay them for fun, but they weren't ever bad enough that I felt stuck playing a minigame. The in-game puzzles were pretty good too. The one that stood out the most to me though was the one where Cloud needs to dress up as a woman to sneak into a house to save Tifa. The game has you search a small town for a dress and a wig through a chain of trading quests, one of the most memorable moments being a squatting competition against a bodybuilder for a wig. I just love that this game doesn't really take itself too seriously all the time, because otherwise you wouldn't get moments like that. The trading quest feels like it was inspired by point-and-click adventures, which were really popular at the time, only this one was good. As a JRPG, the combat is turn-based, but this game mixes it up with something called Active Time Battle, or ATB. Instead of choosing actions in a strict turn-based order, you choose actions for your party members when their ATB meter is full. But the enemies don't wait for your turn to finish. This change adds a greater sense of urgency and forces you to think on your feet. But the items menu, eventually it gets so full, you just never want to use it in battle. And Why are there items in this list that I can't even use during combat? This just gets worse over time as the number of various status effects in the game add up. Some enemies can apply one of many status effects to your team members. You might get poisoned and take damage each turn. Petrified, which effectively removes a party member from battle. Or even turn into a frog. Yeah, that's a thing in this game. Each effect has a corresponding item that lets you cure it. If you get turned into a frog, you use the appropriately named Maiden's Kiss to cure it. All right, Barrett, get over here. Eventually, I learned it was usually best just to ignore any of these status effects and just attack to end the battle as fast as I could, since most of these effects would go away after combat ends. It is far better just to find a materia to take the place of items. Materia is the magic system in this game. Instead of spells being tied to only a single party member, you just equip materia to a party member's weapon. Now they can use that spell. It goes deeper than just basic spells though. Some materia can be linked to other materia to add effects like targeting all enemies or triggering a spell as a counter when you take damage. This creates a surprisingly deep magic system with all sorts of interesting strategies and combos. Too bad I hardly used it. You see, when I first tried out the steel materia, which lets you take items from enemies, I found that it was almost always better to just keep attacking. Steel could just sometimes miss. Some enemies just had nothing to steal in the first place. What was stolen often didn't feel all that useful. This experience with materia kind of just conditioned me to just not bother with it. Another issue with materia is that descriptions aren't always that helpful and leave off important information. Here's the mime materia, and wouldn't you know it, it equips the mime command. What does that actually mean? It means you repeat the last attack that was done, but with no mana cost. Gravity, which equips gravity magic, well, turns out gravity magic does a % damage of the opponent's current health. Even now, as I'm scrolling through this list, I don't know what a lot of these still do. I could have tried to learn what most of these did with trial and error, but the basic attacks were often enough to get me through most encounters, so I never really bothered with the materia, which is a shame because if the game bothered to explain the system to me, I would have likely used it more and had a better experience. This is actually a pretty common problem for the game. It just doesn't explain things. How was I supposed to know what blue materia was for? Oh, I see. I was playing the game on Switch. PlayStation 1 players back in the day, they would have had this instructional manual with the game. It explains how materia works, and look, it even has a section on ATB. It looks like you can change a setting that pauses combat when the menus are open. I probably would have turned that on. It still doesn't explain everything, but clearly the game is designed expecting you to have this information in front of you. I'm complaining a lot here, but I really did enjoy the combat of this game, if only for the unique enemy designs. I was constantly surprised by the variety and detail of the enemies in this game. I was just going around minding my own business and... Is that a house? That's a house! I'm being attacked by a house. Not a bunch of people inside of a house, but the actual house. One cool fact about these models is they are all drawn without a Z buffer, something the PS1 just doesn't have. That means all the parts of these models need to be drawn from back to front. That may sound easy to do, but that gets tricky real fast for complicated designs, which makes the effort put into each of these models all the more impressive. The puzzles along the path of the main quest were overall pretty reasonable, but there are some optional late game content that is completely out of reach without looking up a ton of information. Take chocobo breeding for example. If you do chocobo breeding right, you can get a golden chocobo, which will let you cross over any terrain, which is required to get some of the most powerful materia in the game. Here's what you need to do if you were wondering. First, you need a male and female chocobo that are either good or great, but not wonderful. Of course, good and great chocobos only show up in these locations on the map. Once you have your chocobos, you want to race them at the golden saucer to increase their rank. That will increase the odds of producing a blue or green chocobo. You will need both colors. Once you have a blue and green chocobo of opposite sexes, you want to train and breed them to have a chance of making a black chocobo. Now you need to catch a wonderful chocobo located here, train it up and breed it with the black one, using a Zeo nut, which you need to steal from enemies on this small island. Only then will you have a golden chocobo. How was anyone ever expected to figure this out? As far as I can tell, there is zero in-game hints to help you along the path. The instruction manual makes no mention of chocobo breeding, but there is this ad for a strategy guide here. I think I know what's going on here. See, in the 90s, a lot of games released a strategy guide alongside the game, but as a separate purchase. That alone isn't that big of a problem, except that games would withhold important information needed to find in-game secrets so they could sell it to you in the strategy guide. In some ways, these strategy guides were like DLC before we had DLC. They were just hiding content behind hidden knowledge. Sure, you could get this information from a friend on the playground, but this tactic to sell strategy guides puts a pretty big blemish on this otherwise great game. I actually spent a lot of time doing optional content before finishing the game. This left me way overpowered before facing Sephiroth. Can I add that Sephiroth is the only character in this game with a cool name? Though his cool name didn't stop him from getting a massive butt whooping. The ability to grind for levels gives the player a difficulty knob they can adjust at the expense of their time. I essentially dialed it down to a 1 for the last few fights of the game. My basic attacks were doing the max damage of 9,999 per hit. At this point in the game, I had discovered this materia that you do 4 attacks per turn, so I was nearly doing 40,000 damage per party member per turn. This took what should have been a drawn-out epic struggle and turned them into me spamming a basic attack for 2 or 3 turns. So yeah, in a pretty anticlimactic fashion, I beat the game. So what I learned from this game about making my own 90s game. 1, keep the magic system simple enough that it can be explained in-game and actually take the time to explain it. 2, 90s games don't have quest logs, so if I want to capture the essence of the 90s in my game, which I do, I need to find another way to guide the player. And 3, hiding secrets behind a strategy guide paywall, although profitable, harms the player's experience, so don't do that. As always, thanks to all my Patreon supporters scrolling down the screen. Oh, that's a cool person right there. You should be like them. And thank you all for watching, and until next time, take care.